against Bitcoin.
It's going up forever, Wally.
You're against Bitcoin, you're against freedom.
Satoshi figured out how to manifest something of value in cyberspace forever and transfer it without the intermediary. So what does that really mean? If you can put $1 of value in cyberspace, you can put $1 billion of value into cyberspace. If you put $1 billion, you can put $1 trillion. In the last 15 years, we put 1.3 trillion. Well, there's $900 trillion of traditional wealth in the world. We have opened a portal. Satoshi opened a portal, a technique, and we started seeing economic energy moving from the analog world and the traditional world, the physical world, the analog world, into the digital world, to a pure digital representation. And that's like putting payloads in orbit, right? Like I put a satellite in orbit and it circles the Earth forever. I put a satellite almost in orbit. How long can you fly? Oh, 15 hours, and then your plane crashes. So almost in orbit is 15 hours, and in orbit is 15 billion years, as far as we know, right? So there's a pretty big difference between putting something in outer space versus putting it in space. And there's a big difference between putting something in cyberspace versus leaving it in real space.
Good morning. Welcome to Simply Bitcoin. I am your host, Optimus Fields, and we got a great show for you guys. As you can tell, we're starting strong with some bullish Michael Saylor clips. And that's the theme for today, guys. We've been constantly covering it on Simply Bitcoin for episodes upon episodes about the fact that now people are waking up to this idea that maybe Bitcoin is more than just internet nerd money. And we are constantly seeing signals that we might be seeing a perfect storm on the horizon. There is finally, I know the meme of Bitcoin and amongst Bitcoiners for a long time has been the institutions are coming. Well, they are here. We had the Bitcoin ETF. We have the FASB rules change coming in 2025. It's actually optional right now. And we're seeing that the biggest banks in the world and even central banks in the world and nation states in the world are starting to open up to this idea of allowing, or rather using Bitcoin as we love to use Bitcoin. It's the best way to store your value. And we're seeing this play out in real time. Last week, I believe it was last week, we saw Morgan Stanley unleash their 15,000 agents to start shilling Bitcoin ETFs, of course, as a spot Bitcoin maxi. I'm more concerned about people holding Bitcoin, but hey, ETF Bitcoin, as long as they're getting exposure to Bitcoin, I think it's baby steps into everyone waking up that they need to have a Bitcoin allocation. And we're seeing this play out exactly in real time. And it's just, you just love to see it. Of course, as you can tell from the YouTube title, now we have the news that apparently Wells Fargo has allowed unleashed their agents to start shilling Bitcoin to their clients. They have been a saga around the Wells Fargo bank and their exposure to Bitcoin. At first, they were only allowing the Bitcoin ETFs if people asked for it. Then there was news that came out that they had some spot Bitcoin ETF buys. And now apparently, as of September, as of a couple of days ago, probably the beginning of this week, they are now unleashing their agents out there to start shilling Bitcoin. And it just goes to show that this is the perfect storm. The rocket ship is taking off. It is launching. It is leaving the launch pad. And I know everyone here that we're just getting tired of this 58K gang right now. The 58K price, the chop solidation is starting to wear on people. And this is how you know that the Bitcoin price is about to get frothy, is because when people start feeling bored, they start tuning out. That's usually when Bitcoin makes its incredible price moves. And we've been saying for a while on the show that we really think that the end of this year and 2025 is going to be when Bitcoin starts to enter price discovery mode. So we are seeing the inklings of this happening. And of course, as we've been covering on the show for a while, we've been bringing on a lot of people to kind of spread this message to you guys in every way possible. When these institutional managers start to dip their toes into the market, they're turning around the Titanic. It's not like you and I that can just, sell all our chairs and go all in on Bitcoin. They have to go through all of the obstacles and hula hoops to make sure that they're doing their fiduciary responsibility, quote unquote. And I think the biggest signal, and we're going to talk about this in the culture as well, I think the biggest signal that we're seeing right now is this trend that in the past, it was basically career ending for you to shill Bitcoin, to even talk about Bitcoin in these institutional TradFi rooms. And now it's completely reversed. And if you aren't at least doing your due diligence to look into Bitcoin, you are going to get left behind. Of course, Saylor's been out there doing the Lord's work and framing Bitcoin for corporations. Of course, we do what we can to frame Bitcoin for individuals. We have Samson Mao and others like, Max Kaiser, Stacey Herbert talking about Bitcoin for nation states. So the signal is getting out and people are waking up to this idea that you need to have some allocation to Bitcoin. You need to at the very least, do some research and try to understand what is going on in the Bitcoin space, because the world is digital. And as a digital world, you need a digital money. Bitcoin is the superior money. It's the superior asset. It's been the best performing asset the last, 10, 15 years. Everyone, in my opinion, has at least heard the word Bitcoin. And now it's up to us to continue to educate them and show them that Bitcoin is a viable investment. It is a viable store of value. It is the best money in the world. And now everyone and their mother and their grandmother will soon enough get some exposure into Bitcoin. Anyway, we got a great show for you guys. But before I move on, let me bring in my co-host for the day. Of course, I am here with the one and only Brandon Gentile. Love to have you, bro. Of course, working for Bitcoin Trading Card, fellow content creator, and one of the top off the bench Simply Bitcoin members to fill in on the co-host. So Nico had something pop up this morning, so we got Brandon on. We're going to give you the show no matter what. You guys know the deal here. The show don't stop. Rain or shine, Opti or Nico, the show goes on. So Brandon, how you doing this morning?
I'm so good. Thank you, Opti, and thanks for having me fill in the big shoes to fill. So thank you, boys. Bitcoin's inevitable. Bitcoin is inevitable, but the fight is real. Bitcoin is the human system. Ironically, you played Saylor in the cold open, and one of his biggest fears, maybe his only really fear, is that Bitcoin can run forever. But if humans aren't educated and don't adopt it, it does not matter. That's why this and what we all do here is so important, educating people, and we have to get people towards that escape hatch. And we have to run nodes. We have to get in self-custody. Things are getting real. It's time to man up. Be the 3%. Embrace that feeling of being alone. And that's how you're going towards truth. So glad to be here. Grateful. Thanks, boys.
100%. I mean, me and you have hashed out the 3% a lot of times, and I know all of us Bitcoiners now. We're so above and beyond the whole ridicule us for being Bitcoiners that now we're like, all right, we're just sitting there chilling, looking at our watch, like, guys, come on, catch up. Like, hey, you guys are missing out on all this, but hey, this is our cross to bear here. We got to educate as many people as possible about Bitcoin, and it's starting to catch on, which you just love to see. All right, guys, we do have a special guest. He was chatting with Nico on the Orange Pill app. We got BitcoinLBO on today, and I think he's going to touch on a very interesting topic, but I'm going to pass it over to you, LBO, on where this idea came from and what is a BitcoinLBO and what are we going to be talking about on today's culture.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. So Bitcoin LBO, the LBO stands for leverage buyout, and that's a kind of financial acronym that has been around since I guess the 80s you would consider, because that's when people started doing this thing. If you've ever seen the movie Wall Street, it's basically a story, fictionalized account of how these guys work, right? They go in, they buy companies, load them up with a lot of debt, and they use that debt to, a lot of times it's just for self-dealing, right? They pay themselves. But of course, that involves the entire traditional financial system coming together, right? You've got to have the underwriters, you've got to have the legal teams that approve things. But basically, it's it fell out of favor because of interest rate. It's a hard business because you go in, you figure you can optimize a company, and you find out that there's maybe a little bit less juice in the fruit there, and so a lot of these LBOs end up failing because they become too leveraged. The idea of Bitcoin LBO is more like, again, we were talking in the chat. Peter Dunworth calls Bitcoin the best collateral in the world. The world just hasn't realized it yet. Using Bitcoin as collateral to fund LBOs and then pivoting those companies that you buy onto a Bitcoin standard and a Bitcoin Maxi standard, you should see some very outsized returns from that, both as an individual investor and by bringing people into the Bitcoin network. You increase the network value, right? And you've got the regular. These are typically these LBOs happen with profitable companies, not unprofitable companies, and so quarter after quarter after quarter they churn out cash. I use the example of grocery stores. Grocery stores at a certain scale rarely ever lose money, right? Because they can raise their prices along with the general price level. So think of a grocery store as like a cash register that just keeps ringing and would enable that company to put more and more Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And as the appreciation, occurred, that the value of the company would go up far beyond the initial price. If you look at what Saylor did with MicroStrategy, it's up 10x almost. I mean, it fluctuates, of course, it's very volatile, but it's up basically 8 to 10x from where they announced the Bitcoin standard. So if you could replicate that with other companies that are low growth, it's not the Nvidias of the world or those kinds of high flying growth companies that would be the target for this. It's consistent cash generation that really makes this strategy work in the traditional world, and I think could be applicable in the Bitcoin world.
Love it, love it. And just to be clear here, LBO, this is a thought experiment that you want to hash out. It is going to be a real live, just talk through this process, and I don't want to say speculating, but this is just a maybe a thesis that you've been working on. Again, I don't want to dox you too much, but you do have some inside scoop in the corporate world. So this isn't just coming from a dude in a hoodie on YouTube. This is someone that's seen the back end and had these conversations. So I think there's going to be a great combo. But before we go on, because we got a jam-packed show for you guys, I do have to pay the bills here. So of course, make sure you guys are going to bitcoinwell.com. Buy real Bitcoin. You need to support Bitcoin-only companies. And the reason we love Bitcoin Well is because it is self-custody by default. What does that mean? It means you literally need to have a Bitcoin wallet. You need to have an address before you can actually buy Bitcoin on this platform. We partner with Bitcoin companies that always push the best Bitcoin ethos, and you can never get rug pulled if your exchange never holds your Bitcoin. So this is why we love Bitcoin Well. We love the team over there. They're doing great things. But of course, get your Bitcoin Lightning wallets out. Once you get into Bitcoin Well, you hit the dashboard, you go into the Bitcoin Well rewards, and every time you buy Bitcoin, you redeem the points, and you put a little coin in the wishing well, and you'll get some sats. So we're going to do one here. Yesterday, I got a 21,000 sat one. We'll see what happens. You guys, 500 sats. So first come, first serves. There is an opportunity to win 1 million sats on this. And these sats go to you guys directly. Make sure you got a Lightning wallet out. We do this every single day. On that note, let's get into the numbers.
Bitcoin numbers.
All right, guys, you already know the deal. Do not leave your seed phrase on a piece of paper in your sock drawer. Make sure you are stamping it in titanium. These are indestructible, and you do not want to tell your great-great-grandchildren why you do not have generational wealth, and that's because you left it on a piece of paper in your sock drawer and it got wrecked. So if you go to Stampseed, you can get a 15% off promo using the code SIMPLY. Get yourself a kit. You can Uncle Jim your friends and family. Once you got the kit, all you need to do is buy more plates. Again, this one's a very special Simply Bitcoin branded one. Hit up James. Maybe he'll print some more if you want those. But indestructible. They've tested this. They QC'd this so that they for sure will hold your seed phrase for as long as you are alive. And this is the way to go. Make sure your seed phrase is backed up on titanium. Okay, guys, let's get into the numbers. Of course, we're over here on the numbers, and again, I'm doing the show here, so I'm just going to give you the meat and potatoes here, the only numbers that most people really care. And you guys hit me in the chat if you guys want to see more numbers on mine. But I'm over here on Clark Moody's dashboard, and I'm just hitting you the basic numbers because I think sometimes when we talk about all the other numbers, it's like we're speaking Chinese, and they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about here. But the Bitcoin price, wow, we're under 58K. Okay, the Bitcoin price currently is $57,780 per Bitcoin, which means the sats per dollar, aka how much your dollar is worth in Bitcoin, aka how much Bitcoin you can buy for a single dollar, is 1,731 sats, or 173 bits for the bits Maxi in the chat. We are currently at a block high of 859,718. The market cap of Bitcoin in fiat terms is 1.14 trillion, and the Bitcoin versus gold market cap is 6.62%. We're not even at 10% of gold, so there's so much room to run in the hard money game. Okay, guys. I have to preface this one a little bit because the last time we talked about something similar, our channel did get, it got kicked off. So this clip here from Cynthia Lummis, I think it's a very powerful clip because what do we always say here on Simply Bitcoin? It's this idea of Bitcoin as a peaceful revolution, that once you take your money out of the system, once you start to defund the system by putting your money where it can't be debased, the fundamentals and the incentives of the world start to align and you start to open up to a whole new paradigm. And I think Cynthia Lummis hits the nail on the head that once we get a world that is chasing Bitcoin instead of what they're chasing now, they get on the Bitcoin standard, the world will change. And it goes back to just the fundamental meme we talk about here all the time: fix the money, fix the world. Yes, there's a lot of things wrong with the world, but once you get to a good money standard, once you fix the money, everything else will probably start to fix itself. Obviously, there's still a lot of work for us to do, but I think if you fix the money, about 90% of the problems in the world will start to fix themselves. It really starts with the money. We talk about it constantly, that it's all about the money. It will always be about the money. As the saying goes, follow the money and you'll see the incentives. You'll follow the trail. Well, let's hear what Cynthia Lummis has to say on this idea.
What if during this century, we go back on a standard, but it's a Bitcoin standard? And so we have, yes, we still have our gold, but we now have, in addition to that, another hard asset, a digital gold, Bitcoin, that is growing in value and can underpin the US dollar. And wouldn't it be fun if the next arms race was not for weapons, it was for Bitcoin? Wouldn't it be fun if the US is buying Bitcoin and it scares China and Russia so they start buying Bitcoin, and we have an arms race over Bitcoin instead of over weapons? That we're as globally, we're challenging each other to have a secure store of value.
Amazing. What do we say here? Or actually, rather, what do I say on the show constantly? We are playing a game of Hungry Hippo. The only game that matters is how many sats you have under your control. And we've seen this play out the last 15 years. Bitcoin has been pretty much driven by individuals. So on an individual level, I think we've all kind of understood this game, that we are playing Pac-Man. We're playing Hungry Hippo with Bitcoin. You're trying to stack as many sats as possible. You're trying to hold as many sats as possible long term. But as we're going to be covering today, the floodgates are opening, and institutions, central banks, nation states, everyone is starting to wake up to this idea that, oh, wait, the only game that matters right now is saving in Bitcoin. It's acquiring as much Bitcoin as possible. We've all seen Michael Saylor put on a master class on acquiring Bitcoin. And it is very interesting that the powers that be, the institutions, the real big bucks in the world are so slow to adopt Michael Saylor's strategy here, because it's literally the only viable game that is out there. Once you start to see the landscape, you start to wake up to this idea that, wait, all I have to do is buy some Bitcoin and I can live a better life. Sounds very good to me. And it really goes to what I say here on the show every single day. is this is a peaceful revolution. Yes, there's a lot of things that fiat money is funded, but once you start to get back to stacking good money, stacking hard money, that's when the game really changes and your incentives and your priorities start to change. We've all felt this on an individual level. And to be clear here, I think Cynthia Lummis hit something very important, that probably the biggest blunder of the 20th century is leaving the gold standard and basically going into the fiat standard. And I think so many people forget that the fiat money, the paper money that we use right now, government debt as money, that is the status quo right now, is an experiment. It hasn't happened like this for a long time in history, and yet this is where we are, and everyone is just going along and thinking that this is the status quo, that paper money is the only viable source of money, and further, that the government should be in control of money. But here we are as Bitcoiners, we're like, there's a whole new game in town. It's stacking digital money. It is stacking Bitcoin. This is how you get ahead in life. And especially when you look at traditional financial world or traditional financial ideology, you got to play all these different financial trickery to stay ahead. You got to become an investor to stay ahead. And here we are as Bitcoiners. You know, a guy in a hoodie is just like, bro, all you got to do is save in Bitcoin, take it into custody, and make sure that you're upping your skills, make sure your cash flow is coming in so that you can continue to buy Bitcoin. As we say, stay humble, stack sats, stay solvent. This is the way. Well, just wait until the nation states start to wake up to this game that we're playing. And I know as a Bitcoiner, you're like, I don't care about that. I don't care about the banks buying Bitcoin. I don't care about the US government buying Bitcoin. I want them to buy it last. I get it, bro, but Bitcoin is for anyone, and that signal is waking up, and people are starting to see the writing on the wall that, wait, I need to buy some Bitcoin. And we're going to cover more of this on the news. But before I go on and just keep ranting, I'm gonna pass it over to BitcoinLBO. What's your thoughts on Cynthia Lummis' take right there?
Yeah, I mean, I would love for the next arms race to be about Bitcoin rather than military technology. I mean, of course, security is always a concern for nation states, but I mean, the military technology that we have today is so deadly that I don't see any rationale for it. I mean, so I think she's right, and I think the U.S. would benefit from having maybe not 20% of the of the world's Bitcoin, but some percentage. And I think the biggest fight that you have is that then it can't be micromanaged by the central bankers, and they love that power. To turn off and on the money spigot and to direct it toward their friends. I mean, I told you in the chat, 2008 had a big impact on me. The way they just changed the rules in the middle of the game. It's all funny money in my book at this point.
Yeah, 100%. Now, I think the most surprising part about this is that people don't realize that it's funny money. And, we try to hit every angle, and we'll constantly keep trying to hit that angle and explain to people inflation, explain to people the Federal Reserve, fractional reserve banking, and all that stuff. But fundamentally, people are so ingrained in the dollar that it's hard for them to think of an alternative. And this is what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is the best alternative to the dollar. And now that we're in a digital world, we're never putting the cat back in the bag. Like Bitcoin's here. It's been here for 15 years. It's the best performing asset, period. Everyone that's saved in Bitcoin long term sees that their life starts to get cheaper, sees that their savings starts to grow, which is the complete opposite. And actually, before I pass it on to Brandon, LBO, we kind of talked about this before the show, that when you save in dollars, even if you're making a lot of money, it's still incredibly hard to get ahead. And I always tell the audience that before Bitcoin, I could barely save like $300 in fiat. It would just literally burn a hole in my pocket, and I would spend it. And that's what we're incentivized to do with dollars. And now the game's changing, where just by saving, you can get ahead in life. And I know there's a meme out there that you're never going to get rich saving. And yes, for the most part, they're right. But if you build your skills up, you get cash flows, and you save in Bitcoin, the game becomes that much easier. And it's just absolutely incredible how simple this Bitcoin play actually is, and how anyone in the world can embrace it.
Yeah, no, great point. And what I would say is I ran some numbers. Basically, I started investing in Bitcoin kind of near the 2021 top. So I was by no means early to the game. But because I dollar cost average over the subsequent, 3 years, I'm already ahead, and more than I would have been if I had been in the traditional financial market. So I think anyone with any money that they can keep from spending for 3 years, I think it's a virtual no-brainer to put in Bitcoin. It's like very hard to lose money over a 3-year period in Bitcoin. And I know that that's not the case for everyone, that they have that, but if you can, scrimp and save so that you don't have to touch that dollar for 3 years, you'll have $1.50, $1.75, $2 in 3 years, and that's a better financial return than almost any market's going to give you, unless you have some inside information.
Yeah, 100%. All right, Brandon, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, there's so many things I was just writing down. I mean, it's tiresome to be in a fiat world, right? I mean, I was just with some of my good friends this past weekend and talking about stuff, and they're buying commercial buildings and they're doing this and they're all over the place. And that was the world, I was telling LBO earlier, off screen that was my world too, for years, just the Burr method, right, in real estate that people might be familiar with. And it's tiresome. I have 4 kids, running around, and I can't do those things because you're trading. Everything in life is a trade-off, and you're trading off. Hey, if you're going to have easy money, then we're going to have a lot of problems in life. Or if you have hard money, it's going to make things a little bit more simple. You can save. I mean, I always think of the average McDonald's worker. Like if you have a money that is just and fair, you can have a McDonald's worker make 2 Bitcoin a year. But if he saves 1 Bitcoin a year versus a doctor who makes 100 Bitcoin a year, but he saves 0 Bitcoin a year, who's going to be further ahead in 10 years? And that right there, there's all these little analogies that you can use to really start seeing the power of sound money and where we are going. So I think that, again, going back to some of the money being around, money's been around before governments. It's been around. It will be around after governments. And that's what Bitcoin is going to do. It's going to take out a lot of the riffraff we're seeing. I'm trying not to get your channel cut here again. I'll be careful. But credit, is a tenet of Karl Marx, right? I'm going to, again, be careful with my words. Plank 5 of the manifesto from 1848, you can go look that up, from Karl Marx, talks about credit creation through the central banks. That's the world we're living in. There's no way around it. End of story. And what we're trying to really get rid of and put the power of the money back into the hands of the people, which our founding fathers talked about ad nauseum, if you go back and read their writings. And again, it makes me think, lastly, of Jason Lowery is Jason Lowery right? Like we have this debate now for 2 years of people going back and forth with Jason Lowery. And by the day, he seems to be the one that people are talking indirectly more and more about and supporting that thesis, whether people like it or not, that we're going that direction. Now we have politicians talking about it. And anytime, this is where the politics stuff comes into play, where anytime a politician has Bitcoin on their tongue, that's good for all of us. Because like it or not, again, people look to politicians. Whether that should be done or not doesn't matter. That's fact and reality. People look at politicians as leaders. And when they have Bitcoin on their tongue, that is great for all of us. That just means Bitcoin is spreading out to normies who otherwise would not have known it. And you can't believe everything you see. So central banks saying they're hoarding gold over the last 10 years. Who knows? Who here can confirm that they're hoarding gold? What if they've been hoarding Bitcoin? What if China and Russia have been hoarding Bitcoin? We have no idea. And we can't even trust their inflation numbers. So how are we going to trust them about any aspect of the money or what they're saving or what they're mining or what they're doing? So I think that's where, once we start breaking down this into its component parts, we start seeing, the real game at play here.
Yeah, the real game is stacking Bitcoin. There is a global game theory game being played out right now, and it's who can acquire as much Bitcoin as possible. It feels so good being a Bitcoiner. It feels so good being a Bitcoiner and somewhat early to this. And it really kind of goes to the whole idea, like, I'm late to Bitcoin. I know everyone will look at Bitcoin at like 70K and be like, I'm so late to Bitcoin. But I'm reminded of this clip of sailors basically saying, like, look, if you bought a block of Manhattan in 1700s, you're probably doing well. If you bought that same block in 1800s, yeah, the price has gone up in time. If you bought that block in 1900s, yeah, the price is probably increasing. But today, if you look back and you bought that block in Manhattan in the 1900s, you're like, I'm very happy about it. Even if you bought in the 70s or the 80s till today, it's like you're never late to good, high quality assets. You're never late to the best money in the world. And this is where we are right now. And people are waking up to this, and you just love to see it. All right, guys, let's get to today's news story so you guys can feel a little more bullish.
The Daily News.
I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Foundation Devices. It's self-custody done right. They built a premium grade hardware wallet called Passport right here in the US. It's fully open source and verifiable. It's the most intuitive Bitcoin wallet designed with a UX reminiscent of a simple feature phone. So you will know how to navigate it and use it the moment you pick it up. Get your Bitcoin off exchanges and into your own hands in just a few minutes. Experience the peace of mind that comes with taking ownership of your own keys. After a massive sellout during Bitcoin Miami 2023, the Passport is back in stock at foundationdevices.com. Bitcoin only, open source verifiable, completely air-gapped security model, gorgeous design craft, premium grade materials. If you're thinking about getting your Bitcoin off exchanges, this is the one for you. Check out the Passport link in the show notes below to learn more.
Do not think about taking your Bitcoin off an exchange. Make sure you are taking your Bitcoin off an exchange. It's one of the most important aspects about Bitcoin. And one of the beautiful aspects about Bitcoin is that you can self-custody it without a middleman, guys. If you need to rehash this, go back to the white paper. It's literally in the first paragraph. It's in the abstract. This is what this is all about. Make sure you're taking your Bitcoin off an exchange. Okay, guys, I do want to set the scene with this incredible tweet by Sam Callahan. And I think this is what we're seeing play out. And me and LBO were talking about this before the show, and this is really going to continue the conversation in the culture. But Sam's got a great tweet right here that he dropped this morning. And he goes, if you're a C-suite executive and this slide comes across your desk one morning, how do you not think about it for the rest of the day, week, month, and year? And for the audio listeners, what is this screenshot? It's MicroStrategy before and after adopting a Bitcoin strategy. So on August 2020, they had no Bitcoin. Their market cap is at 1.2 billion. The enterprise value was 0.7 billion, and their share price was $124 per share. And then in July 2024, they have 226,331 Bitcoin under their control. Their market cap is 38 billion. Their enterprise value is $40 billion, and their share price is $1,800 per share. You know, and you can see the market cap ARR is 140%. Their enterprise value is 182%, and their share price goes up 97%. So this is the trend that I think we're seeing play out. Obviously, it's happening slow. They have to do their due diligence before they can fully embrace Bitcoin. They got to understand what they're getting into. But we're starting to see that the Michael Saylor strategy is catching on, and people are starting to see that, hey, if I add Bitcoin to my balance sheet, maybe this is going to improve my company. Maybe this is going to improve what the shareholders, get in value. All right. So going to this news story, of course, it's Wells Fargo seemingly now starting to embrace and shill Bitcoin to their clients. So I'm going to kind of go through the saga. Here we have January 12th, which is 2 days after the ETF. You'll see that Wells Fargo's wasn't necessarily against the Bitcoin ETF, but they were only going to allow customers to invest in an ETF if they asked their asset manager, and which is seemingly probably a good take when this ETF just got launched. Of course, the BlackRock embracing Bitcoin meme was still kind of there. Like once Larry Fink gives Bitcoin the legitimacy, then of course it's a signal to the rest of the market that, hey, maybe I have to look into this Bitcoin thing. And then later we heard in May 10th, that Wells Fargo, America's third largest bank, owned spot Bitcoin ETFs, though the numbers weren't that much. I believe the numbers, if I'm correct, it was only about $141,000 in the Grayscale ETF. But the fact that they're dipping their toes into this just goes to show that Bitcoin and just the Bitcoin ETF product in itself has some sense of legitimacy by these big banks. And again, I'm hearing the Bitcoiners out there like, we don't care about the banks. It doesn't matter to us. Yes, I get it. But this just goes to show that Bitcoin is maturing, and we've been saying this for a long time. I think Bitcoiners have been saying this for forever, basically, that this moment was going to come. And now we heard that Wells Fargo will begin pitching Bitcoin ETFs to its clients in September. Today is September 3rd, and of course, they manage $1.7 trillion in assets. So just diving in here a little bit, of course, they're going to pitch the ETF in September. And you see Wells Fargo is set to begin pitching the ETF. The financial institution manages $1.7 trillion in assets, and they're following in the Morgan Stanley footsteps, which we covered last week, that Morgan Stanley has unleashed their 15,000 agents to start shilling Bitcoin to their clients. Of course, in that news, they were only going to shill Bitcoin to their high net worth individuals. Well, we also kind of have very similar trend here from Wells Fargo. So Wells Fargo's advisors have been briefed on the specifics, including limits on retail portfolio percentages and account asset minimums of over $1 million. trillion. This move positioned Wells Fargo as one of the major U.S. banks embracing Bitcoin and crypto investment products alongside Morgan Stanley. So it just goes to show that the signal is catching on, that the biggest banks in the world are starting to wake up to this idea that, hey, maybe we need to let our clients invest in Bitcoin. As we were saying in the beginning, it used to be basically career ending to embrace Bitcoin, and now it's career ending if they don't embrace Bitcoin. But I really like this tweet here from British Hodl, and he goes, Wells Fargo, with its more than 13,200 financial advisors, will begin actively pitching Bitcoin ETFs to their clients in September. They already could if the client asked about it. Now they can actively make outbound efforts to sell the products, accelerating faster towards my prediction of 50,000 U.S. advisors selling Bitcoin to clients by the end of the year. Now, what is the difference here? We talked about this when BlackRock started to show the ETF, when they embraced the Bitcoin ETF. Well, now we have, and you guys could argue this, but now we have the smart money in the room actively shilling Bitcoin. Just think about the due diligence they have to do to fully understand what Bitcoin is and then go out to shill a Bitcoin ETF product to their clients. And now that they're going to basically be pushing Bitcoin, which is what we say here all the time, Bitcoin is the best performing asset, period. And you probably want to get some just in case it's catching on. Now we have, and again, I can hear the Bitcoiners yelling at me. Now we have the stamp of approval from the smart money out here that, hey, you might want to save in some Bitcoin. So no longer is it just a dude on a hoodie in YouTube telling you to save in Bitcoin. It's the dudes in the suits out there shilling Bitcoin. And I think we're going to see this trend catch on throughout the end of this year. And of course, really kick in 2025 once Bitcoin enters price discovery mode, or what I'm thinking, it enters price discovery mode. And this is going to really kick in that positive feedback loop of, hey, if you want to get outbound returns, if you want to outpace the market, you probably need some Bitcoin. And of course, there is some concerns, or rather, there might be some concerns about just buying the Bitcoin ETF, though maybe you want to have some money in the traditional financial system. Maybe you want some outside of the system and take Bitcoin into custody. But this does just go to show that the signal of Bitcoin is maturing. We're no longer just internet nerd money. Now it's becoming a viable financial instrument for the biggest institutional managers in the world. And let's not forget, Bitcoin's market cap right now is what? 1.14 trillion. Of course, Wells Fargo is not going to go all in on Bitcoin, but they have $1.73 trillion assets under management. Like, the game is fundamentally changing. And yes, I know I can hear the Bitcoiners out there speaking and arguing about the equality of Bitcoin and, inclusive, and it's about the little man. I totally agree. This is why we do what our show, how we do it. We want everyone to hold Bitcoin, but we got to remember that there needs to be an army of us Bitcoin plebs out here to move the market. But we get one convinced buyer of Bitcoin, someone just going all in, and this market is going to go nuclear, especially when you consider that there's not that much Bitcoin on exchanges. Things are going to heat up in 2025. Will we see this at the end of this year? Who knows? I have friends calling for September. We're all kind of memeing. Maybe it's October. Who knows what's going to happen by the end of the year? But I think we are all convinced that there's a perfect storm on the horizon. And once the price of Bitcoin starts moving, it's not going to come down. So, hey, shouts out the 58K gang for giving us these cheap sats right now. But soon enough, 58K gang's price manipulation will be over and the price is going to run. So as I say all the time, keep stacking, make sure you're dollar cost averaging, or if you have, a little more discipline, make sure you have some powder on the side so you can buy up these dips. Whatever works for you, just know that the tsunami is coming and you want to be prepared. You don't want to be selling your Bitcoin to BlackRock or to the Wells Fargos of the world, because this is how and I don't like using the word, but democratize this whole race right now. Bitcoin is the real Occupy Wall Street, and you as an individual, you want to hold on to them sats for the long term. You want to make sure you don't rug pull yourself, take your Bitcoin into custody. This is how you protect yourself, because as anyone that is semi-awake can tell you, the politicians, the bankers, they don't care about you. They're just looking for the next big buck, the next big gain. So you need to take action and save in Bitcoin. Empower yourself as an individual and save in some Bitcoin. So before I go to Brandon, let's go to LBO, considering that you do have a little more inside scoop on the traditional financial world.
Yeah. So I think you're right. It's the trend is in Bitcoin's direction in terms of people who have credibility, starting from Larry Fink on down to, a Morgan Stanley or Wells Fargo advisor, are talking about Bitcoin. I think what I've experienced, I've worked at big companies for the last 20 years in what's called the corporate strategy world, right? So when executives kind of don't know what to do next with their companies, like should I pivot to market A or market B, or should I go after a new customer segment? I'm part of the teams that analyze all the different options and help them understand the trade-offs. And a lot of times what ends up happening is companies get into a position where they don't have a real next market to go to, and so they kind of get stuck, and basically the company grows with the GDP, right? So if the GDP is up this much, their revenues are up this much. And so, a couple years ago, I brought up the topic of Bitcoin on the balance sheet in regards to what Michael Saylor was doing, and it was kind of it was rejected primarily for a couple reasons. One was, well, Michael Saylor owned half that company, so he could do what he wanted, which isn't true, but they use that as an excuse. Or, well, we don't believe in Bitcoin, so we're not going to do it. And I'm like, okay, but just educate yourself a little bit. But I think that, so there was a couple of those like pre-made excuses that would cover up for the fact that they're just scared of losing their jobs, right? Which is fine. I mean, if you're sitting in that CEO seat, you're making a lot of money, you don't want to rock the boat so much. But for the shareholders, it's not fine, because in the sense you showed those numbers that MicroStrategy has returned. Any company in the world that returned that, their shareholders would be happy, whether it was a Bitcoin standard or whatever the asset was. So I think that's the key. Is you look at that ARR, even in so I was looking up the ARRs for leverage buyouts, and that's considered one of the highest return strategies. And those are probably like 30% a year, right? So you compare that 140, 180,
Wow.
100%. This one strategy, and it doesn't even really require a lot of tinkering with the company. He didn't really redirect. Yeah, he turned it into a Bitcoin development company, but he's also servicing his existing customers, generating the cash flows from that, and just taking those cash flows, instead of buying back his shares, which even Warren Buffett says share buybacks are a scam. On basically they show the company as doing better than they really are. But just doing that one thing without changing anything else really moved the needle for that company in a way that hardly any companies can say they've achieved.
Yeah, totally. It's really incredible the returns that MicroStrategy has achieved just by simply putting Bitcoin on its balance sheet and then continuing to buy as much Bitcoin as
Yeah.
possible. It's such a simple strategy, but
Yeah.
it in the
And
tre- in the
it's like
yeah.
it totally leverages the fiat system, because companies want to loan money to executives and company owners. They want to do that because that's how they get returns, right? And so it's a total judo move on the entire
Yeah.
fiat system that I think once people see it, they can't unsee it. And I think MicroStrategy is doing great work trying to educate people. The idea that I'm trying to bring to the table is, let's force the issue by pooling an investment pool made of Bitcoiners, going out and buying a company and just forcing the issue, so that they have no excuses of career risk. It's no career risk. If your company's taken over at a fair price that your shareholders consider fair, which will be above the market price for sure, then they have almost a fiduciary duty to sell the company to you, and then you can do anything you want in terms of policy around investment allocations and things like that. So Michael Saylor has a great video. It's about 12 minutes long, where he talks about the different options he thought through as a CEO. He's like, well, I could buy a company. I could just sell the company to somebody else. I could go into a new market. He said all of them paled in comparison to what he saw as the upside of Bitcoin. So 100% agree with that assessment. And I think that's exactly the kind of assessment that the executives at the companies I work at ask me to do. And when I come back to them and say it's Bitcoin, they're like, eh. So it's kind of an odd situation where that it's still a bit too much of a career risk. So that's why I'm saying force the issue. Don't give them the out. Let them keep their jobs. That's what they really care about.
Love it. Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna break that down more in the culture. So we'll put a pin on that one. But Brandon, what's your thoughts on this Wells Fargo unleashing their agents? Are we falling into just the Bitcoin number go up trap, or what's your thoughts when you hear this news?
Boy, someone said in the chat too, and the fake accounts from Wells Fargo. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. We do live in a clown world. It's inevitable. Again, like we kind of opened the show with, like, it's inevitable. There doesn't mean there's not hard work that has to be done. It's a human system. We need to put the work in. We need to educate. But Saylor is the new Buffett in a way. So we just talked about Warren Buffett. That's what Warren Buffett did, and that's kind of what LBO just alluded to in a sense. And that he got his, insurance companies are notorious for, like, you have the float, you've got all this cash, people give you their premiums, and then you've got all this cash, you get to go invest. Like, hey, I'm a better investor, so I'm going to go invest this for you because you don't know what to do. And that's in essence what a bank is. I mean, banks are, you're a private money lender to a bank. Banks, as most people know here, that's not your money anymore. You've now contractually agreed to being a private money lender. The bank takes it and goes invest it because the average person has no flipping idea how to invest their money to get a return. And that's where the LBOs come in, the Burr method in real estate. Now you can just save. Those are sophisticated strategies, and you have to have experience, and you have to have contacts, and you have to put a lot of work in to do these things. But that's what we're forced to do. But with Bitcoin now, you have the ability to just save in Bitcoin. Like we talked about, the McDonald's worker can now save and outcompete the doctor. That's never really, we've never had that ability to do that. Some would argue gold, but not at this level, right? Bitcoin gives us that opportunity that we humans have never seen before. It's literally the invention of the fire or the wheel. So Wells Fargo, again, these people are going to keep coming in. They're going to keep doing it. And it literally is inevitable because more people every single day wake up just like all of us. I mean, we think of our own stories of how we woke up. Again, I was in the real estate world, and I had people, I was doing Facebook Lives and doing Instagram Lives, trying to build my fiat real estate business. And I would be every day going live for years, started in like 2014 or 2015, just doing this as these features were coming out on social media. And I would have people over time in 2014, 15, like, well, you're talking about gold and silver. Like, what do you think about Bitcoin? And so it took me probably 2 years, really, until the run up in 2017 to say, you know what, I got to really look at Bitcoin, because I was buying all these other things. I was into gold and silver. I was into real estate and using debt, because that's the system we have. A fiat system is the debt. He who has the debt wins at the end of the day. And now it's savings, right? If you're in a Bitcoin standard, savings is the asset, where, again, it's perfect that LBO is here, because debt is the asset in a fiat system. But that's a sophisticated world you have to live in. You have to be the sailors or doing Burr methods in real estate, or you got to be doing LBOs in business. That's a very sophisticated world, and the average person can't do it. So that's what has me so excited. I know you two gentlemen and everyone here in the chat, that's why we are so pushed, and you feel compelled. I mean, in your heart, right? Like in your deep inside your gut, your heart, your intuition, you don't want to see everyone else get burned. And that's where it comes from. It's truly, it's actually doing altruistic things, unlike, FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, these fake fiat altruism. It's actually like, wow, I see something that none of us are taught, and no one really sees. I feel compelled to now go share this. And it takes time, though, even though, because we've all grown up in that world, like you guys are saying, Sam Callan's tweet, he puts that on someone's desk. How do you not think about that all day long? It just takes time. I mean, I was someone in this world, and many of us, we're in this financial world, in this business world, and it still takes you time because of any number of things. Because I have 4 kids, I've got family, I've got a lot of family members. Some people have no family members, and they're traveling all over the world, and they're busy, right? So it's just any number of combinations, and it's only been 15 years since Bitcoin was invented, created, discovered. So that's where the speed at which we have moved really is unbelievable. And the fact that presidential candidates are forced to come. I mean, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. They were forced to come speak at the Bitcoin conference. I mean, you think about that. That is insane. And the banks, sovereign wealth funds, they're all coming because it's inevitable. It's the chicken too tasty, as that one football player said about the Chick-fil-A. Like, I'm not giving this up. I'm not canceling this thing, man. Sorry, chicken too tasty. Bitcoin's too good. The properties are just too good. So that's we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, the chicken's too tasty. There is something you said, and I was just thinking the irony of Wells Fargo or even any of these banks starting to embrace Bitcoin, when it's just so simple to buy Bitcoin, save in Bitcoin. You just don't sell it, just store your value in Bitcoin. And the irony isn't lost on me that we are having, banks, which are basically, just investors with your money, are now like, actually, you know what? Like, we got to embrace this Bitcoin thing. And we're over here like, it's just stupid simple, just saving some Bitcoin. But of course, like, that legitimacy that comes from the big brand names and the suits, it does give us a stamp of approval for everyone out there. Now they all have to look at Bitcoin as a legitimate investment or a legitimate way to store your value. But the irony isn't lost on me that, like, oh, these very complicated institutions that do some super ridiculous ridiculous financial, some financial fuckery are out here. Like, yeah, we're going to embrace Bitcoin, and we're just like, just buy Bitcoin, just save in Bitcoin. It's super simple. Like, keep it simple, stupid. This is the key ethos of Bitcoin here. But anyways, let's get into the culture, because I really do want to talk with LBO and walk through this experiment, mental experiment.
The Daily Culture.
All right, boys and girls, mainly boys and some girls, make sure you get on the Orange Pill app. Go to orangepillapp.com. Stack friends who stack sats. As we've been talking about constantly on the show, Bitcoin is the new money. It's the better money. And when Bitcoin goes where we think it will go, you want to ensure that these relationships you've built on the internet are solidified in meat space, because as a Bitcoiner, there's potentially two roads we can go down. One that is a little more scary, and you want to have a local community of like-minded individuals to insulate yourself, and one where Bitcoin just completely takes over the world, and you want to make sure that your network is filled with high-powered individuals, with high-powered money, and that's what you can get on the Orange Pill app. So if you're the lone and crazy Bitcoiner in your community, jump on the Orange Pill app. Make sure you try to connect with people. If there's no one in your area, put an event out there, and maybe more people will show up. But this is the goal. Stack friends who stack sats. And actually, interesting story for you guys. This is how we got today's guest on, was because of Orange Pill app. BitcoinLBO reached out to Nico on the Orange Pill app, and he's like, yo, I want to come on and talk about this BitcoinLBO idea. So we got him on the show. Anyways, let's start with, I saw someone in the chat, LBO, first and foremost, they don't know what an LBO is. They don't know what a leverage buyout is. So can we just start from the basics so the audience can catch up to speed with what you're talking about from the rest of the show?
Yeah, so typical LBO, what happens is an investor, group of investors, they'll come forward and say they've got, $100 million, but they want to buy a $500 million market cap company, or they want to pay $500 million. They'll go to banks who will then say, okay, we'll lend you the other $400 million, and here's going to be the rate of return. Here's, the time you have to pay it back, all of these terms and conditions on the debt. And then the bet that the group that's doing the purchase making, that at the end of it, they'll be able to sell the company for more than what they've paid for it. And so it's a relatively, Brandon's brought up the idea of real estate a couple of times. It's very similar. A lot of leverage. Real estate's one of the most highly leveraged asset classes. This is taking that level of leverage and applying it to stocks. And so when you hear about companies in the news, like, oh, there was a bid for, whatever company, and it was for $50 a share, and the company was trading at $35 or $40 a share. It's almost certain that's like an LBO type purchase. It's where people look at the potential market value of usually equities, and they say, if I just did all of this radical restructuring and really simplified the cost structure, made the company more efficient, I'd be able to sell it in 5 or 7 years for twice what I paid for it. And that's kind of the typical thought process that an LBO operator will go through. And so it often involves a lot of pain at the company that's targeted, because they have to make pretty radical changes to change the share price, to change the earnings trajectory of a company that's market cap of that sort. It takes a lot of movement in the operations. And so these people, generally considered some of the smartest of the traditional financial people, they can also make some dumb moves. There's no doubt about that. When anything involving leverage, you can get wrecked pretty quickly, as even Bitcoiners know that with some of the stuff that happened in the last few years. So that's the basics of an LBO, and the kind of people who put it together are, like I said, they're considered some of the most savvy people. They've got global networks typically, and they can figure out if anyone can move the needle on a share price by the 30 to 40% that we were talking about compared to MicroStrategy, it's these kinds of people. So I give them the credit where credit is due, but I think that there's even bigger fish to fry in the LBO world. But it would require having a pool of capital that was accessible and able to invest. And that's where I think Bitcoin being over $1 trillion asset, you used to talk, I remember reading a lot about decentralized finance and these kind of like, it was a little bit more associated with Ethereum, but I think some similar concepts would apply where you pool together your Bitcoin. I put in a Bitcoin, you put in a half a Bitcoin. Pretty soon it's real money, and then you could go out and see which companies would fit your criteria to do this kind of a leverage buyout.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So let's transition more into like the technicals of how this Bitcoin LBO would work, or using Bitcoin as a collateral. And you mentioned in the email, our correspondence back and forth, about using Bitcoin as collateral to buy companies and putting these companies on a Bitcoin standard like MicroStrategy. And you kind of talked about it earlier in the news of the incentive for these CEOs and why it's a no-brainer. So maybe start at the beginning of how the mechanics of Bitcoin LBO would work, and then why it is a no-brainer for the CEOs.
Right. So once you've got your capital available to make the purchase, right? That mix of collateral that's Bitcoin and debt that's underwritten by banks, then you go to the company's board of directors and say, hey, we want to buy your company. Here's the price. Here's the price you're trading at now. It's absolutely your fiduciary duty to hand over the keys to this company to us, right? And we would be the new beneficiary owners. And then once you do that, you go in and you talk to the CFO, the chief financial officer, and you basically say, look, you've been investing in projects and assuming that your cost of capital is 10%. Jesse Myers has a great article about this, Croesus BTC, right? He has a great thing about why Bitcoin should be your cost of capital. A lot of these companies are investing in things that maybe return 10, 12%, when what they should be doing is holding those dollars on the balance sheet in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin will be appreciating at the 25 to 30% range. That way, over time, you're investing only in new investments that actually give you a higher expected return than Bitcoin. Now, there's a lot of gaming in how you set the expected return, but for the most part, if you set the bar that high, companies are going to keep their cash on their balance sheet. They're going to convert to Bitcoin. And presumably, if the trajectory that we all think is going to happen with Bitcoin happens, a dollar that the corporation saves today will return many dollars on the balance sheet later. And now these companies, like I said, they're actually fairly well run for the markets they're in. There's not a lot of dumb people in the executive suite, but there's no real impetus to get outside of the company, kind of portfolio as it is. And so they end up chasing these projects that don't really pan out. And that's what I've seen over my career. And I'm kind of like, there's got to be a better way for the company to save its money too. I mean, this isn't just related to individuals. This is company level too. And Bitcoin is, in my opinion, I've come to the conclusion that Bitcoin is the answer to that.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Everyone in the chat's like, wait, this is very interesting. Excuse me, guys, choking on my saliva. Okay, LBO. What do you think the institutional managers need to see to make this play? And what are the potential risks out there for the CEOs to actually dive in headfirst in this strategy?
Yeah, I think Michael Saylor. I think he hits on all the bases. With FASB rule is important because that gives the companies the ability to value it correctly on the balance sheet, right? I think the other thing is the bank custody. Because banks want to hold the collateral. They don't want the collateral to just be kind of floating out there in your cold storage or whatever. It has to kind of come together into a pool that the bank has transparency into what's in it. Of course, as custodians, they have no legal right to it unless the business fails, and then you have to somehow put over some of the collateral to pay off, their failure to pay the debts. So I think those are two things that I think are key. I mean, I forget Michael Saylor's third one off the top of my head, but
I think it was the ETF. I think it was the ETF.
ETF, and the ETF is great because companies can put that on their balance sheet, but even that's not as beneficial because that's still a security, and so it falls under securities asset allocations on the balance sheet. Whereas, as you've seen with MicroStrategy, they don't own the ETF; they own the spot Bitcoin because they have no limit on that because it's a commodity, and commodities like an oil company can hold oil on its balance sheet, but any company can hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, right? Because it fits with the accounting rules. So a little bit less of a benefit to the company from the ETF. I'm sure some companies will buy some ETF maybe as a way of avoiding the rigors of self-custody, which I'm sure at that level are pretty significant. And Michael Saylor, I know, and MicroStrategy, they develop a whole playbook. But I think that those are the two big things. And then I think the other thing is once someone does it, it will become like lemmings off a cliff because that's how the traditional financial world works, right? You have financial panics and financial booms is because once someone sees someone doing something successful, they follow, or if they see something fail, they want to get out as quickly as possible. I mean, so I think that's that's part of the game theory of it all. Is if one company buys a company, or if this pool of Bitcoin capital buys a company, and within a couple of years the share price is up 10x, other people are not going to look at that and say, oh, that can't be replicated. Of course, at a certain point you have diminishing returns, but I don't think we're anywhere near that yet.
Love it, love it. And you told me this early in the show, but just for the audience, who would be the ideal person to achieve this Bitcoin LBO? You were saying it might have to be some really deep pocketed whales. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Obviously, it once you think it through, it's very obvious. But will you hash this out for everyone?
Yeah, so think about it. A lot of people say, oh, well, Bitcoin has no yield, right? So it doesn't have a yield. But if you put your money to work, you put your Bitcoin to work in an operating company like, MicroStrategy, or, I've used the example of grocery stores. They're just cash cows. That's your yield, right? I mean, and so, yeah, you need some whales because a you want to get as much scale as possible, right? There's a big grocery merger happening right now with a company called Kroger, and their market cap is about $30 billion, and so they're merging with another big operator of grocery stores. That's another multi tens of billions of dollars company. So, but if you can buy a $30 billion company and turn it into a $300 billion company simply by the Bitcoin strategy, again, that's kind of a no-brainer to pay even 50, 75 million for it, right? Or 75 billion, excuse me. So I think that's the kind of numbers I'm thinking about to make it really scalable. And there's many hundreds of billions of dollars sitting on corporate cash balances that could be converted to Bitcoin without impacting the operations of the company, because they don't need that cash for day-to-day operations. They just basically generate enough cash to be able to fund their operations day to day without ever dipping into the treasury. And so the treasury gets bigger and bigger, and they have a harder time allocating it and things like that. So these are the kinds of companies that I think they're publicly owned, so they have they can't really not sell to a pool of capital. And if some Bitcoin whale said, hey, I've got 10,000 Bitcoin, I'm an early OG, I'm going to put that into the pool. And now all of a sudden the scope of the companies and scale of the companies you could buy becomes that much bigger. I mean, you could start at a small scale. It's just, let's scale this up and make it real. So that whole $1 trillion of Bitcoin, if you leverage up the way that LBOs do, then you can buy like $5, $6, $7 trillion worth of companies. That's a lot of companies.
Incredible, incredible. I it's really not a pivot, but I do, and we talked about this again before the show. And I do want you to like expand for the audience out there this idea, of course, is Bitcoin LBO product, or rather mental experiment that we're walking through right now. But earlier, before we started the show, you were chatting about this idea of how Bitcoin interacts with traditional financial world, and we're seeing that there's many opportunities. So, looking down in the future, what are the different ways that you think Bitcoin will react with the traditional financial world? I know a lot of Bitcoiners are like, oh, Bitcoin's going to replace the dollar. It seems like you're kind of with this symbiotic view here that like traditional financial world and Bitcoin can coexist for the betterment of everyone.
Certainly in the short run. I mean, I think the central issue that will develop over the long run, and just me speculating because we don't know. We've had fiat money, we've had central banks, we've had metallic money for much of human history, but even that was debased, right? People would melt the coins and add different elements to them that weren't part of the initial monetary metals. So I think that the final, if there is a final death knell of fiat, it's going to come from people just getting tired of the constant fine tuning of the economy. You know, um, Bitcoin doesn't have 12 people in a room trying to decide the interest rate, the cost of money. It's a free market for money. So I think over time you may end up with people who just get sick of it. I mean, as I said before the show, I kind of threw in the towel on fiat money a little bit after the 2008 financial crisis, when they just changed the rules. And I think over time more and more people will get there, because as the system goes on, my perspective is the benefits of the fiat system are accruing to fewer and fewer people, and that's just a recipe for people to revolt and say, I don't want this anymore. And Bitcoin is there as the answer, just as Satoshi kind of indicated when he said, in the Genesis block, oh, the Bank of England's okay as a second bailout, right? They're already changing the rules after changing the rules, right? So it's a no-win game. You're constantly on a treadmill with fiat. I think people will realize and drop out, and the surplus value of what they save versus what they consume would be best stored in Bitcoin, or over any kind of period of time that's longer than a few months, or a couple years.
Love it. Love it. Okay. Brandon, do you want to chime in here? You got any questions for LBO or comments from a more layman perspective here? What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't pretend to be that smart, but I'm just dumb jock, hockey playing, real estate guy over here. Yeah, I think that I couldn't agree more though. The Titanic is going down. We're all on it, and which is the fiat debt-based legacy monetary system. But it takes a while. It took what 2, 3, 4 hours for the Titanic to go down, right? And that's probably 100 years or whatever, basically in our terms, in U.S. I guess post 1913. So like LBO said, people will keep realizing it. And I touched on this earlier too. Like, it just takes time. I was studying this game hard after 08 too, like leaving Michigan State University, playing hockey. I was playing professional hockey, and you had a lot of time. And so I'm watching the crash unfold in 2010, 11, 12 as a early 20 something. And like, I got to figure this game out. And all I was doing is studying and go play hockey for 4 hours a day, work out, whatever. And I had a lot of time to just study, watch the news or whatever, study more. And eventually it still took me 5, 6, 7 years in 2017, 2018 to finally get in when I had been studying these things for that long. So it takes a while. But into this other part of it, of the LBO part, it does feel like it's maybe a cycle away, LBO, to kind of what you're saying. It feels like we need some more, we need more whales in the sense that we need, I feel like we're at a critical mass where there's enough people in the space, but we need those people to be a bit wealthier, right? Like, we're in that space where it's a numbers game at the end of the day. Like, how many intelligent people are there to be able to, with enough purchasing power, to then put this together and do that? That's just life cycles, right? So I think that, to your point, I couldn't agree more. It feels like this next, 2, 4, 6 years, it's going to be a lot of that happening. It feels like the next obvious thing with Saylor doing what he did over the last 4 years, setting that tone for a lot of these companies. And now you're going to see, here we are, right? We're talking about it, right? It's 2024. We're talking about this. Feels like we're at that launch point for like this next phase. That was 2020, 24. Now we're 24 to 28, where you have like, okay, what's the next evolution of this? And I agree too. It feels like we're very far from diminishing returns. I would guess that we're 10, 20 years away from that. Again, right along with the Saylor thesis that he laid out, I think in Prague last year, with maybe it comes down to 14% eventually, just kind of, whatever it is, 50 years from now, or 20 or 100 years. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I feel like, and again, we've talked about real estate a few times. I asked Jeff Booth this when I interviewed him recently, like, why aren't more real estate guys with his real estate background? Why aren't more real estate people doing this? And the answer, which was the only thing that made sense to me, was just time horizon, right? Like, again, this is one of those things where it's hard for people. I saw people in the chat like, why isn't the price going up? And these all make sense. Why? But at the same time, as a guy who still has rental properties, it's not super easy to just all of a sudden up and sell a business or up and sell real estate, right? There's tax implications. They're far away, or it's this and that. Again, family, like life, these things happen where you can't just drop everything and just like, I'm selling everything. I've sold a number of them, but I haven't been able to sell them all, right? And it takes years for these pieces to fall in place and to try to get these things together. So everything, it's like you're trying to find clues, and we have everything right in front of us. We see it. We're picking up all the bread trail, crumbs, and you see what's happening, and it's just being able to pattern recognize and say, yeah, this is happening, and trust your gut, trust your instinct, and know where this is going. And it takes a long time, because daily, day in and day out, only so much can happen. And that's where you have to look back as a macro and say, okay, this is what's happening. The last thing I'll say really quick is the Mark Moss just recently, again, did his retire on Bitcoin thing and kind of laid out this big thing. And he talked a lot about just lending against your Bitcoin, 5 or 10%, and doing that. That's why I love LBO was talking about this. I always thought of phase 1 was accumulation, at least for me in my life, where you have accumulation phase. And then phase 2 for me was, how are you redeploying this Bitcoin? And again, we're getting to this phase now where there's enough Bitcoiners with enough purchasing power where this is going to start taking effect here in the next few years. What are you doing with that Bitcoin? How are you putting it back into society? And for me, it's probably going to be apartment complexes. It's probably going to be more real estate. When my tenants, I'll know this. I always tell people, I'll know when we're in hyper Bitcoinization, number one, when my tenants can pay me back in Bitcoin. I'll know absolutely. I'll know that the cycle is healed. I know things are better at that point, and I can kind of creep back out of my hole, and things are, the dust is kind of settled. That's number one. But in the interim, and I saw again in the chat, people are talking about Bitcoin needs the dollar. Bitcoin doesn't need the dollar. The dollar is nothing. Dollar is fake. It's fiat. It's smoke and mirrors. And the dollar needs Bitcoin at the end of the day, if anything. But Bitcoin will just be traded straight up. You either trade straight up your Bitcoin for a business or for a real estate or whatever it is, or in the interim, which was what confuses a lot of normies, a lot of people. They're like, well, what happens again when the dollar goes away? Or they're thinking of these questions, which are normal, but you have to live in two worlds, right? We still live in a fiat world and a Bitcoin world. So it is tough, and you have to live in. One of my definitions of genius is being able to hold opposing opinions in your head at the same time. You have to be able to live in both worlds. And meaning, can you lend against your Bitcoin? Again, we're not talking anything crazy, but lend against it and then go buy productive assets with that Bitcoin that you lent out, but it becomes fiat, right? You're taking that fiat to go buy a business, go buy a car wash, go buy an apartment complex, or whatever it is, and then produce more Bitcoin. Or maybe it's more fiat, but then you turn it back into Bitcoin, right? And so to me, it's fascinating, LBO. I love this conversation because it does feel like we're on the precipice of this is the next phase. And I think this is what the Bitcoiners are going to start seeing more of and more people talking about. So I love that we're having this conversation now. It's beautiful stuff.
Yeah, and I think there was a question in there that I'm going to take and ask LBO. What is your time horizon on this? Like, when do you think that this might catch on? Is it this cycle, next cycle? Is it 2025 because the FASB rules are coming in? Like, what is the time frame on this?
So if I'm forced to answer that question, which I'm happy to do, I think you might want to think about as interest rates go lower, that something like this becomes more viable, right? Interest rates have a big impact on the cost of the debt that you borrow in. Now, the interesting thing about that is Saylor is able to get debt at far below the market interest rate. And it's, in my opinion, and I think if you hear him talk, he says this almost explicitly, it's because Bitcoin is the collateral he's holding, right? So that collateral quality gets you a lower interest rate. So right now, I think he's paying like, a little bit over 2%, 2.5%, 3%. But as interest rates at the Fed level come down, this kind of a strategy will become even more viable because it's like basically free money to go out and buy productive assets. To Brandon's point, I mean, that's how you put your Bitcoin to work, is buying those productive assets that are going to generate the cash flows that you then subsequently almost immediately turn around and put to Bitcoin. If companies would do this voluntarily, we wouldn't have this discussion, right? It's the fact that companies are so gun shy and the executives are career risk shy that I'm trying to put this out in the discourse to say, hey, can we get some people to coordinate in a legal way? Obviously, one of the risks I think is the FTC may have some questions, right? There could be issues around the size of the investors. A lot of these big liquid capital pools, they have to have like $1 million just to pay the entrance fee kind of thing. So you got to be an accredited investor. So some of those legal hurdles, would probably also need to come down.
Love it. Okay. LBO, final question. We are coming close to the end of the show, but what is the last advice, the final 2 sats that you want to leave with the audience? What's the final message that you want to leave with the audience? It could be about this Bitcoin LBO. It could be about Bitcoin in general. Yeah. Just what's the final message?
No matter what else you may have as an investment option, put at least half of what you can save for a period of a minimum of 3 years into Bitcoin, and I think you'll do very well.
Incredible. Such simple advice. Love it. Love when you can just distill it down to simple advice, simple actionable advice. Well, LBO, thanks for reaching out to us. I guess we'll have to bring you back on soon once we get some more signs of this actually catching on. And you know what, we can point back to this episode and be like, hey, we were talking about this in September and now it's happening. And then we can flesh this idea out a little more. So LBO, really appreciate it. I guess, you did, kind of dox your face a little bit, but if people want to reach out to you, where can they reach out to you? If not, what do you want to share?
I've got a couple articles up on Substack. One of them compares actually real estate in St. Louis and real estate in San Francisco after the 1906 real estate earthquake in San Francisco, which would you have been smarter to buy, right? Because St. Louis was one of the booming cities at the time, but you would have been smarter to go out west. I think Bitcoin is the San Francisco in that analogy, and fiat money is the St. Louis. But I don't write much. This is my first show I've ever appeared on, but I'm glad you guys enjoyed it, enjoyed the thesis, the thought experiment, and hopefully, you like you say, there'll be some uptick, or there'll be something that happens in this space. I do think Bitcoin is the best collateral in the world, and it should be used, put to work. It's great for the compounding price, but the network effects of Bitcoin are so strong that I think we need to get more people into the network, and that will drive the price appreciation for all of us who were in it before. And that's a lot of people talk about. We front ran the institutions. If we can front run them in this way, this is just another way in which we may have front run them.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Okay, Brandon, thanks for filling in as co-host today. Thanks for coming off the bench. Plug your socials, and you do a couple of shows, so you can plug them.
Yeah, no, I love filling in, hosting, being on the show, whatever. So I just appreciate you guys a ton. Yeah, you can find me at Brandon_Gentili on pretty much all the socials. I think we have our interview show, just the YouTube channel there. It's my name. We obviously work with Bitcoin trading cards, and do marketing and PR and help the team there. We have an awesome team there, trying to educate the world, the young, the old, the collectors, everyone, and how can we educate people. So I think that's about it. That's a little bit of everything. So appreciate you guys having me on, and LBO, it's just awesome talk. Great seeing you, meeting you, and I can't wait to have more of these discussions here in the future.
Yeah, man. All right, guys, let me pull you behind the scenes as I wrap up today's show. All righty then, boys and girls, mainly boys, but some girls. Shouts out to the girls in the chat. This is your episode. Let me see what number. I think it's 1067. This is September 3rd. If you think we provided you some value, subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our Rumble channel, follow us on Twitter, give us a like on the show, comment in the comments in the on the videos, share this to someone that maybe is potentially some deep pockets that might be thinking about this Bitcoin LBO project. But of course, we'll be back tomorrow. Normal schedule, normal programming, 12:15 p.m. We go live Monday through Friday, same time, every time. You guys can yell at us for being late. I know. But we love you guys. Have a good rest of your day. Get outside, touch some grass, get a workout, and eat some good food. Call your mother. Call your family. Make sure you are becoming a good person overall. It's not just about stacking sats. It's about becoming someone worthy of holding them sats. All right, guys. On that note, it's your boy Opti, and we will be back tomorrow. Peace out.
It was brought to you by BitcoinWell.com, on a mission to enable independence.